this meeting is being live streamed, and so I needed to get that going. So welcome to any live stream viewers who are watching us as well. So as I was saying, we scheduled this extra meeting as an optional time for task force members to talk about the strategies that have been developed so far. And we are in the strategy development phase of the climate action planning process. We have a website open on salemclimateactionplan.com that is receiving ideas from the public, and the city has been helping to spread the word in a variety of ways to invite members of the public to submit ideas. And then all of you contributed quite a few ideas at our last workshop. So we have a spreadsheet that we emailed a link to out earlier that is our kind of master collection of all the strategies that have been developed so far that have come in through various channels. And then we have this online repository of ideas that are coming in from the public. So we thought it would be a good idea to just be able to talk with you all about the strategies that have come in. We have a list of questions that we'd like to kind of work through, discussion questions that can help us think about what we're seeing. And then we're happy to take any questions you may have too. So we're going to start off with Belina. She's going to walk us through briefly the strategies that have been submitted so far. So I'll turn it over to you, Belina.
Great. All right, all. You should see the strategy spreadsheet, and I just put a link in the chat as well. So I was going to plan on spending about 10 minutes or so walking through the strategy spreadsheet. I know sometimes it's hard to get geared up and excited for reviewing a Google spreadsheet on your own. So we're hoping that doing this together could be a little bit fun. But if you have questions, clarification questions along the way, feel free to ask those. But like Kim said, we'll be doing some discussion after we go through this spreadsheet. So this first page of the spreadsheet is just a disclaimer that this is our working draft. So obviously not all strategies in their current form are going to be put into the climate action plan. But we wanted to share the working draft with you all to get your feedback today. And then also heads up, homework for the next workshop that we have together on February 17th, you'll be prioritizing these spreadsheets, the strategies in this spreadsheet. So you'll get to do some of that pre-work today a little bit. And just a note on the sources, Kim touched on where all of these strategies have come from, but just a note again that these are from individual emails from whether it's some of you from the task force, members of the public through city channels, also our visioning workshop, our latest workshop around the strategy development, and just noting that the strategies that are submitted on the engagement website aren't yet included in this spreadsheet because we're leaving that activity open to the community through the end of the month. But we'll take a look at some of those strategies towards the end here. And you can see down at the bottom, there's 8 categories. So transportation, energy, zero waste, natural resources, economy, affordability and accessibility, community, and food. And these were those vision areas that we came up with in our first workshop. And obviously these aren't set in stone, but these are kind of the working category areas. So we'll go ahead and start with walking through transportation. So we'll go through these categories, but I just want to do a quick scroll down to show how many strategies that we've come up with for transportation already. So big shout out to you all for plugging in those strategies during various workshops, emails, conversations, interviews. Just a reminder, transportation is Salem's largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions, so it's great that we see so many strategies here. So starting off at the top, we have this kind of overarching vision statement from Ian over at Chariot. Thank you, Ian. Also from the workshop, that the vision is really that people in Salem will have the choice to choose a mode of transportation that works for them. That living in Salem doesn't mean that you're relegated to having to drive a single occupancy vehicle. So that's the vision. To get that vision, we need new infrastructure and increased services. So that's where the strategies on this tab really focus on. So expanding public transit infrastructure. So what are the dedicated lanes, bus service points that we can focus on? That's really this category. Scrolling down to incentivizing public transit. So the idea of providing free transit passes to residents of Salem, but noting that not just giving people bus passes means they'll ride the bus. I'm clicking on a cell here that shows outreach and education could be a strategy. So people need to feel comfortable with riding the bus to actually ride the bus. There's also incentivizing public transit could also mean disincentivizing single occupancy car travel, maybe with a Salem gas tax. So again, heads up for the next workshop, you'll be rating all of the strategies across all areas through a variety of criteria. But ultimately what you'll be doing is you'll be doing red, yellow, green voting on a Miro board. Green being, yes, definitely include this in Salem's climate action plan. Yellow being, I am interested, but I need some more information. And red would be, no, definitely do not include this, kind of like a veto vote for a strategy. So I'm pausing here on the Salem gas tax because I could see this one being a point where people could say, yes, green, go for it. Let's do it. We need to do this. Yellow being, hey, I'm interested in this, but I need some further details. What exactly would that tax be? What are the numbers behind it? And red being, I could see some people not wanting to implement a gas tax. So scrolling down to improving biking and walking trails as another category. So kind of putting together a comprehensive bike and walking network, prioritizing spending to get that done. Some of these strategies here. And then going beyond just biking and walking trails, but actually creating new pedestrian zones. So what are the areas of Salem, when we're thinking of land use and development, where could we actually block cars off and create it just for people moving around? So pedestrian zones, maybe there's some places downtown, removing one-way streets, and then moving into encouraging the adoption of EVs. So we have some strategies around converting the city fleet to all electric, also implementing a citywide charging network for EV vehicles, prioritizing telecommuting and EV readiness. So telecommuting, another part of going through the strategies today, we can talk about where the overlap points are. So prioritizing telecommuting also comes up in economy. Moving down to increasing economic incentives for transitioning to carbon neutral transportation. Strategies here could be built out more. Right now, they're pretty focused on what are the incentives for electric vehicles, noting that there's some state programs already, and potentially with the new presidential administration, there might be federal dollars for the state or the city or individuals to purchase electric vehicles.
Hey, Belina, can I ask you a question? Not to interrupt, but go back to the EVs, for example.
Sure thing.
Has there been any effort on your end to try and consolidate some of these? Because really some of these are really the same thing. And
yes.
So
That's a great question, Mike. And this is just the raw collection of all the strategies. So we have not done the consolidation yet. So you're looking at everything that we're looking at, but great question. You're right. There's definitely some repeats and definite overlaps.
And just to say, the next step of the process will be that we will consolidate all the strategies and the duplicates, and we'll kind of refine the wording and refine the whole list. But yeah, we're just showing you kind of the raw version of what's been collected so far.
Will you also be providing criteria for evaluation?
Yes. Another great question. I would show you the Miro board right now, but it's under construction. But some of that criteria, number one being equity impact. So let's say there's a strategy that could significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but let's say it disproportionately affects a population, a vulnerable population. We need to consider that. So first, equity. Second, some greenhouse gas impacts. If it's impactful to help the city reduce emissions, absolutely. We also have other consideration areas that we'll be sharing with you too, but we can dig more into that in a bit. Great question. So we also have the disincentivizing single occupancy travel, trip reduction ordinances. So there's some legislative activities in terms of strategies. Charging for parking. We know that downtown has some free parking. Maybe charging for parking could be a disincentive here. Decreasing speed limits in neighborhoods, going down to setting goals for multimodal trips. So updating current plans so that there's goals for these active commute modes of walking, biking, and using transits. High-speed rail comes up a few times. So Mike, like you pointed out, that's definitely one of the repeats that we can consolidate. And increased density in city planning. So this might be something that maybe doesn't seem initially a transportation strategy, but we know that there's a lot of interest, obviously, with land use right now with our Salem and the comprehensive plan update. So land use strategies, usually you'll see them fall into the energy or transportation category. We have a lot of the increased density in city planning in the transportation area, noting that with greater access to schools, work, social events, healthcare, everything in a certain area will help reduce further trips away from where someone lives. So that's where that is here. And then I said we'd take maybe 10 minutes or so. Not sure if I said that out loud, but I do want to turn it over to you all soon. So energy, we have solar, we have disincentivizing natural gas usage, incentivizing energy conservation. So we know that there are some existing programs, and at the next workshop, we'll hear from utility companies about their emission reduction plans, as well as they'll touch on some of their energy conservation programs here, but lots of conservation opportunities. And then this last one, phasing out combustion engines. So whether that's with landscaping equipment or again with the city's fleet of vehicles fitting in with transportation. Going to zero waste. So looking at food waste as a huge opportunity, like most cities, it seems like Salem has a great opportunity to reduce waste from food. So on the front end, maybe there's programs that could help households as well as businesses and organizations reduce the amount of food generated. And then on the back end, maybe there's some city or community-wide composting programs, biodigestion, increased recycling for materials that might not be accepted in traditional recycling programs, source reduction policies, data tracking. So if we want to get to zero waste, we have to have some tracking mechanisms in place, noting that Marion County has a diversion rate, and if there's a way to more finely tune the city of Salem's diversion rate, doing a waste audit to get an understanding of what is in the landfill can help identify the opportunities for reduction. Construction and demolition waste, making sure that it's mandatory to divert as much waste from going to landfills from construction and demolition. And here we see someone brought up a point about an equity impact, making sure that increased considerations and care for waste doesn't increase housing costs that are passed on to renters. And this will come up in the affordability and access category as well. And then we see a couple more strategies around multifamily housing waste, making sure recycling will be required at those sites, as well as financial incentives and potentially an incentive for keeping materials out of the waste stream. Maybe there are fines to consider for contaminated waste streams. And then over to natural resources, we have a couple of uncategorized strategies up here. There's an idea about tree trimming exemptions for solar panels, adding biochar as a soil amendment to city soils, expanding the tree canopy. So again, this is another area where if and when trees are planted throughout the city, focusing first on areas that are most in need of increased tree presence. Going down to reducing flooding impacts, we'll connect those impervious services, reducing impervious surfaces and protecting people from flooding. So we know that flooding is going to continue in Salem, might very likely continue in areas that aren't in the clearly identified historical floodplains as well. So making sure that we have permeable pavements and other green infrastructure that can help prevent flooding and runoff. So making sure that we are not getting chemicals and materials in the wastewater treatment center that we don't want in there. And then also involving the community in natural resource conservation. And better involving the community comes up in a few of the different goal areas. So when decisions are being made about a particular neighborhood or community, making sure that people are involved with that decision-making process. And then switching over to economy. Some ideas, the state of Oregon has an Earthwise program where businesses can become certified. Maybe there's a Salem equivalent where you can have green certified businesses in Salem, letting people know, oh, this is a business or organization I would like to support or frequent because they're making steps to becoming more sustainable and resilient towards climate change. Technology, there are some strategies around autonomous vehicles as well as autonomous delivery. Workforce, these are some examples that could be a little bit built out more, but the idea of flexible working from home, remote working to reduce emissions from commuting. And then we also have some sections on commuting itself, and then building policy. So this will likely influence emissions from building electricity, which could fit into the energy tab as well, but also the idea of land use development, such as this one I'll highlight for middle housing. So additional or auxiliary dwelling units, what are the ways that we can increase housing access and affordability? And over to affordability and accessibility, some more uncategorized strategies up here, but some connections with the community health assessment. So addressing community health needs in both Marion and Polk counties. Keeping housing affordable. So if there's some upfront costs to some greener developments, making sure that those upfront costs aren't passed on to renters if possible. Preventing gentrification and displacement, making sure people aren't forced out of where they are currently living. Moving down to protecting public health, so improving indoor air quality and filtration of apartment buildings, which is huge, and we know that's important. We're learning very well from the current pandemic, and promoting access to healthcare. So again, the idea of development and maybe the 15 to 20-minute neighborhood, can people get access to all their resources that they need in where they live? And then again, involving residents in decision making. So making sure that there are accessible documents, things are translated clearly, making sure that frontline communities are prioritized. And then shifting over to community. So there's a lot of outreach and education strategies here, but things from preschool and kindergarten curriculum all the way to Salem Kaiser schools and career and technology programs at the community college and local university levels. So how do we get students better engaged with learning opportunities and advocacy and volunteer opportunities? Access to resources. So increasing the walkability of neighborhoods, removing food deserts, so finding access to fresh groceries. Then moving to prioritizing people in areas of Salem that are currently and have historically been excluded. So again, when certain strategies have been selected for implementation, how and where and with whom do these strategies, how are they implemented? So identifying areas potentially like Northeast Salem, where we could pay more attention to the quality of parks and tree canopies and community rec centers there. Again, language accessibility and access, professional translation services, making sure people know where to go for information, no matter what language they speak primarily. And then again, facilitation and representation of more diverse residents in the city, addressing housing needs, and connecting residents through innovative programs. So not only programs like this Library of Things in Vancouver, Canada, where people can share resources, but it also helps build social resilience. So we get to reduce waste, reduce emissions, but also we get to know each other and build a stronger community network. And then also cultivate arts and culture. So this is one that came up, also fits with economy, but there was an idea that potentially people are living outside of Salem and commuting in for work because Salem doesn't have the amenities that they would like in their place of residence. And then lastly, we have food. So expanding community gardens, increasing farmers markets, and not just farmers markets, but also incentivizing local CSAs, so community supported agriculture, finding opportunities to connect food recovery efforts. So finding food, getting that to people instead of going to the landfill, connects with that zero waste strategy that we were talking about earlier. And then also with the idea of increasing community supported agriculture, finding areas in Salem that could be utilized for urban production food systems. And then Healthy Soils came up with natural resources, but the idea of utilizing urban agriculture as a carbon capture mechanism. And then we have some ideas for mobile food pantries. So instead of asking people to go to a certain location to pick up food, maybe go to where people are, meet them where they are, to provide some access to food. So I will wrap up the strategy spreadsheet here. I'm going to toggle over just so you can take a glance. This is the engagement website with all of the input. And earlier, Kim was thanking John for adding some ideas here. So if you would like to add ideas to this page, please do so. Again, this is open until the end of the month. So for anyone listening in on the live stream who is not on the task force, please add your ideas here and we'll be taking a look. And you can also go in and vote on strategies that someone already submitted that you say, yes, I like that idea a lot. And you can click that red heart. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim. I'll stop sharing the screen and we'd love to hear from you all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Belina. I see we have a couple of questions, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask you to hold your questions for a moment because I'm going to take you through kind of a structured set of discussion questions right now. And it has 4 layers. And so the first layer is just kind of asking you what you observed. So I just wanted to ask, as you reviewed the strategy list, what do you notice? What caught your attention? And you can just like throw out a word here or there, or you can pop them in the chat too. What did you notice when Belina was reviewing the strategy list?
Certain random nature of them.
Yeah, laundry list.
Laundry list, random nature. Okay, thank you.
Very broad.
Very broad. Mm-hmm.
Some are doable, some are just, I think we have the really lofty strategies, and then we have some practical ones that make more sense, either financially or just acceptability.
There's no silver bullet.
There's no silver bullet. Thanks for that, Julie. Yep.
And I would say a lot of them were required investment of money, and relatively few of them talked about how to raise the money.
Yeah, this has been some, I want to follow up what Robert said. It's very difficult to look at all these actions without thinking about how are they going to be done and who's going to do them and who will pay for them.
I agree with John and Robert that we need some sort of cost benefit analysis. And I also want to say, and I've been having some out of the meeting conversations with people, and they're going to be hard choices. We're going to have to make hard choices. Someone commented to me, it was actually Patricia Farrell, when I was saying yay for hydroelectric power. She said, well, hydroelectric power has some other types of issues. And my response was, yes, we're going to have hard choices here, and we're going to have to make them, or at least recommend to the council that happens.
Right.
It also seems like it would be useful to have a clear definition of what a strategy is, because it looks like there's a mix of ideas, actions, opportunities, and if strategy should be clearly defined, so we're talking about common things.
That's a great point, Ken. Any other just quick observations about what you noticed? Janet?
I noticed that when we did the Miro board, we ended up putting that equity lens across all categories. And now that we've broken things out into different categories, that seems to be gone. Like, where did that go?
So you're saying the strategies that you're hearing do not reflect an equity interest?
Well, they are in very specific boxes in specific cells, but we put that kind of overarching band across all the Miro boards, and I'm just not seeing that reflected unless you want it reflected in the criteria for evaluation as opposed to reflected in the categories. And also, I feel like we should put something on these categories that indicate which activities are going to reduce greenhouse gases immediately, since that should also be a priority.
Okay.
I know Mike Chaffee's got a hand up, but one other thing I would do is, if we're prioritizing these on the 17th, I would populate these with the community ideas that we have to date. In part because some very good community ideas, in part because I dumped all my ideas into the community ideas.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Yeah, my thought has something to do with a paper I actually have on my screen that I just downloaded like 2 weeks ago. It talks about a framework for these kind of policies where you look at it through 4 lenses. And I like it. It leaves out the equity lens, unfortunately, Janet, which is a very good point you brought up. But it talks about the effectiveness of the policy, how cost effective it is, the political acceptability in the community, and finally, is it a transformational signal? In other words, does it kind of push the policy to move it along? So like the EV stuff, are we helping the private sector and the public, help adopt them, EVs? So I'm happy to share this paper, but I think it's an interesting way to look at it.
That's great. Yeah, Mike, if you could email that to us, that'd be great. We'd love to take a look. Okay, then moving to the second layer of questions, I'm interested now in hearing about your kind of emotional responses. Like, how do you feel when you look at this list? Like, what surprises you? What feels exciting about it? What concerns you or challenges you about it?
Nothing surprises me. In terms of, from the what standpoint, we know what we need to do. It's a question of how we get it done.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I think that we have is with the nature of these lists, it looks like everything's equal, which is getting back to the criteria that Mike Jaffe was talking about. Now, for example, I think there's a lot. I'm just going to take our transportation objective, which is about transportation choice. We're not going to get within spitting distance of reducing emissions until we're all driving clean cars.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a question of what are all the actions that the city can either take by itself or encourage to enhance us switching over to clean fuel cars, trucks, buses, everything.
Okay, thank you. So trying to stay on that sort of emotional response level, what excites you or concerns you or challenges you about what you've seen so far? Jane?
I liked a lot of the comments. I think that we've got a lot to work off. What really disturbs me, and I probably will be in a minority on this, is the impact to downtown businesses if you close all of downtown. That one suggestion of Ferry Front Center Church to car traffic. I think that's just exactly what Eugene did many years ago with not any success at all. I think there's some discussion, maybe a block for a restaurant row or something, but to close that off, you really are limiting your access to people that do need to drive. I mean, older people are not going to walk and bike. And so that's my one. And my second of my two is closing off the alleyways. We have lots of businesses that their storefront is the alley. And then we have deliveries to businesses that really does help the traffic flow because it takes their vehicles off of the main street. So I think, some things sound great, but to me, it's just very visceral, bad reaction. But I'm always in the minority, so I don't care.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you very much for sharing that, Jane.
You're welcome.
Wendy, and see how Wendy has her little hand icon? If you click on the participants menu on the bottom, you can get a menu that allows you to raise hand, and that's a little helpful for me because I can see who can go next. But now, Wendy, I don't see your hand. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm ready. I took it down because I forget to take it down sometimes.
Okay.
I'm really excited. I think there's some great ideas. I agree with John Savage's comments and Robert Chandler and Councillor Anderson about prioritizing and really starting to understand which ones are kind of the highest priority and cost impact. The concern that I have, and I just want to compliment Janet's comments, is I don't see equity. I just don't see it. And equity is BIPOC, it's people with disabilities, it's language. And that is something that I think is very important and should be very clear in terms of applying it throughout this document. So whether it's the criteria as Janet suggested, or it's incorporated within each kind of subcategory here, I leave that to the committee's wisdom, but I'm concerned that it's going to get lost, and it's nice to talk about, but it's not going to be in the action and objectives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with that, Wendy. And I think, again, what you're seeing is a raw document. It's just a compilation of all the ideas that have been submitted so far. They haven't been refined, and they haven't been really refined by us. They haven't had a professional lens go through them. And it's really important to us that this plan does center equity in the final plan. So just to say I agree with you, and I think it's a responsibility for all of us as we're submitting these ideas and refining them to make sure we're thinking of the equity impacts. So thank you. Tom.
Thanks. I agree with the equity comments.
I
Yeah, I agree with the equity comments. And I also, for Jane, I lived in Eugene for 30 years. So I understand that that was a failure downtown. And to me, the downtown issue relates more to parking, to charging for parking, to incentivize people to maybe not, take their single occupancy vehicle downtown. The other thing is, this is just general. We're going to have to balance carrots and sticks here. And that's where the real hard decisions are going to make. It's pretty easy to talk about carrots, although there's the cost analysis of the carrots, but it's a little harder to talk about sticks because in effect, you're sticking it to somebody. That's how somebody might view it.
Okay, Tom Hoffert.
Yeah, no problem, Kim. Always happy to give that to Tom Anderson. He brings a great perspective as well. Right away, I appreciate your last comment that this hasn't really been gone through by the professional consulting group. I think when I look at this list, I think we can all put our arms and envision some of these things happening and causing a positive influence in our two goals in the years that we've noted. I would like to see kind of and trust that our professionals contract to do this can bring us best practices that have really been put into practice in other communities rather than us pioneering. And I think my concern is in how, if we price ourselves out of allowing people to live in this community due to some of our actions, that's really concerning. And also, I would echo Shane's comment. We have been very intentional in our work to try and rebuild and keep a very strong downtown. And the arterials are a little bit of that ecosystem that helps it be healthy and the like. So I appreciate the look at what shutting down certain alleys and streets would have in this group's consideration of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you. John Savage and Tom Anderson, your hands are still up. Did you have an additional comment?
Just a couple of general ones that pop out as I was looking at this. One is sort of a partnership strategy. That is, I think that to really make this happen in the city, there's going to have to be partnerships with the state, with the users, with the community-based organizations over a common set of goals and actions. The other thing that comes out to me is a legislative agenda. A lot of this really is going to depend on what happens outside of Salem, whether or not you're going to meet the mission targets. Third, I wanted to just mention sort of what I considered a big equity thing that I know was somewhat controversial in Portland, is that they created a clean energy fund where the money is essentially directed by representatives of BIPOC organizations. And I think that should be explored.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. We'll look that up. Okay, then moving on to the next level of questions, kind of interpreting what we're seeing. I wonder what might be missing from this list. Some of you have mentioned a few things already that you think might be missing. But also, what qualities do you think would need to be present in the Salem community in order to successfully implement these strategies? And I'd love to hear from people who haven't had a chance to speak yet. What might be missing and what qualities would Salem need to have to be able to implement? Ian?
Yeah, I of course think transportation, and I think one thing that is easy to lose sight of is that for a lot of transportation changes to work, there has to be a system-wide change. It can't just be, oh, we're going to do one street, because I'm thinking either bike lanes or sidewalks. Their piecemeal approaches are difficult to do. And that takes a concerted effort, probably over a decade. And that's building out what are essentially arterials for bike lanes or completing the sidewalk inventory. And I think having, you know, a overarching goal and then mid steps along the way is really important.
Mm-hmm. So having an overarching goal and having a broad view of all the interconnections in order to ensure success. Okay, that's important. Janet?
I mean, one of the things that I'm really concerned with is that we not individualize the solutions, that we not expect, you know, kind of households to make, you know, big changes, because I think that, you know, the biggest emitters are, you know, kind of big businesses. And so I think we need to, you know, kind of focus on like what are the top 10, you know, kind of biggest emitters in Salem. I have a list of those from Salem 350. You know, that might go back to the kind of clean energy fund comment. But I think we need to think about how, you know, there are different levels of responsibility. And so there should be kind of different levels of action. And we need to, you know, kind of not individualize the problem and not kind of go downstream, even though those are politically easier answers, because they're kind of more likely to be voluntary and not include, you know, kind of cost and system change. But I think we should, you know, think about, you know, kind of changing things in terms of, you know, kind of like production and at the like point source, and also, you know, obviously vehicle miles traveled, but also like vehicles miles traveled of like a, you know, like a big business like Salem Hospital or something like that, and not kind of push it off onto individuals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. John?
Two comments. One is I don't think the community is engaged on this issue. I think it's irrelevant to most people's lives. So I sort of talk from there. I somewhat disagree with Janet. I think that we are dealing with individual, we can talk about the Big 10 or whatever. Transportation is a lot of diffused individuals. I think that the one thing that I would like to see is that I think needed for implementation is that we're facilitating use of existing programs and getting the word on those. I'll give you an example is community solar. This is an opportunity I think virtually no one knows about where you can become a solar owner without putting solar on your rooftop. It's the outreach on it's horrible. Nothing, you know. I think that you could develop solar, for example, at Willow Lake and work with PGE to see if that could become a solar energy project that the community could buy into. And that to me is the kind of facilitation that I think is needed.
Great. Thank you, John. Any other comments about what might be missing from these strategy lists that hasn't already been mentioned?
I put in the chat the integration, land use, transportation, open space through an integrated effort, because the connection between land use, services, and transportation facilities really is one of the things that drives it. And then trying to mix open space as a consumer of greenhouse gases rather than a producer of greenhouse gases in that mix is a systems view that I think is really important, and I don't see any space for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, Ken. And we've heard that loud and clear from this group from the beginning, that there's such an interest and importance on land use planning issues. And sometimes we struggled a little bit too about where to put those in the spreadsheet because they are system level. And so, you know, we'll see as we develop this work more where exactly they fit in, but we're certainly going to give that a lot of attention in the final plan.
Welcome to Oregon.
Mike.
Yeah, my thought has more to do with what happens after the climate action plan is adopted who at the city, or will they be like a new position or a new office or whatever, who is going to take the lead to continue the work, working with the state on projects they're working on something that was just mentioned, this community solar or whatever. What if this plan is worth doing, isn't it worth having someone or some office in Salem that says, okay, we've adopted this plan. Now this person, this office, whatever, is now responsible for developing the actual actions we're going to do. And my concern is, given Salem's budgetary issues that we always hear about from council, it's hard to fund staff. That's my concern, that we're going to come up with a plan, but city will be able to afford to have the person, the resources to have someone pretty much focused on this. It'll be maybe divvied out a little bit and it'll lose focus.
Yeah, very important point. Thank you for bringing that up, Mike. The implementation planning is key. Counselor Anderson, I see your hand up. I just want to make sure we're giving other people a chance to speak too.
I'm responding to Mike's point. I'm not raising any new point. In the last budget session, the council put in about $150,000 for a long-range planner as opposed to a short-term planner. And the impetus behind that was to be able to implement climate action plans. So we've already done that, Mike, and I hope it ends up that way. It's also like, do we want to spend the money on consultants or do we want to spend the money on someone on staff? And we determined to do it both. And I think that's works, but we have a long range planner, and the goal hopefully is to look at the implementation of a climate action plan.
That's great. Thank you, Councilor Anderson. I hadn't heard that before, so that's great to hear. Okay, then looking at the fourth level of our questions, and then we'll just open it up to general discussion. In your opinion, what are the non-negotiable items that must be included in the climate action plan? And you can pop things in the chat if you like, or raise your hand and I'll call on you. What are the non-negotiable items? Ian?
We have to have a built-out transportation infrastructure that gives people genuine choice of which mode to use, whether that's bike, bus, walking, whatever that looks like.
Great, thank you. Janet?
We need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by, about 50% by, kind of 2030, ideally, at least 2035.
But that's a goal, not a strategy. Do you have?
Yeah, I just feel like whatever plan we come up with, it has to hold the line on that, because I feel like, cost matters and feasibility matters and political will matters. But I feel like, if it doesn't make the goal, then what's the point of doing the plan at all? So I feel like, if you're going to ask me my, number one non-negotiable, it's like that you meet the science-based goals, period.
Okay. Councilor Anderson, is your hand still up? Or is that left over from before?
No.
Okay, I'll put it down for you. Any other comments? What are the non-negotiables in terms of strategies that this plan must include?
Well, Kim, I'll inject this aspect of it. Everything that's been laid out in the suggestions and the strategies, the non-negotiable has to be the fact that this impact of whatever final product comes out of this is going to have an impact on the most vulnerable of our community. Therefore, we cannot afford to not have that understood and mitigated as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Benny. We were talking about that earlier, I think before you joined, and yeah, okay. It's super important to make sure that equity lens runs throughout the plan. Other thoughts? Okay, well, I think we'll just use the remaining 12 minutes or so just for open discussion. So I'll just kind of open the floor and invite you to share with us and with each other your thoughts on the climate action plan, on this process, and on the strategies.
So Kim, let me ask you then, on that basis of what you just summarized, where we are right at this moment, are we at a place where we're saying between now, here we are in early February, and what deadline are we looking at, and in order to critique and put a formal proposal in place, and then next steps after that? What does that look like right now?
Yeah, thank you, Benny. That's a great question. So we're in the strategy development phase of the planning process right now, which basically lasts this whole month of February and then continues on a little bit past that too. We have our next workshop on February 17th. So we're going to spend some more time digging into strategies and prioritizing them. If you didn't hear, Belina said at the very beginning that we're going to be sending you some homework next week where we're going to ask you to vote on a number of strategies to help show where the priorities of the group lie. But then once we finish the process with you on February 17th, and then we finish getting all the input from the public on the website, that website stays open until February 28th. Then basically we at Veritas Group start a process of strategy refinement. And so that's when we really go back and we take all this input that you've given us, we talk with subject matter experts along all of these areas, and we refine what's actually realistic, feasible, and impactful for the city of Salem. And then we will share a refined list with you at some point. We don't have a specified date for that yet, but it will be sometime this spring. And then a little bit further down the road, then we go back and we start writing the draft plan. And then the plan is to release the draft plan in the summer. I don't have the project plan right in front of me, so I don't know the exact date. But basically a draft plan will be released to the public, and then there'll be a public engagement process where we get a lot of feedback from the public, and then finalize the plan in the fall. And then, we revise the plan in the fall, and then it's finalized in December. So basically, Veritas Group's involvement ends in December of this year with a finalized climate action plan. Does that answer your question, Benny?
Absolutely, it does.
Okay, great. John, you have your hand up.
I think this has been mentioned by Janet and others in the past. I would find it extremely useful to get a list of programs that have worked in other cities. Mm-hmm. Either from Rocky Mountain Institute or that other group. If we're going to start evaluating, and I think it's somewhat premature evaluating because I don't know how and again who are going to do some of these actions. I would really like to see a good list of proven programs that have been run by a city or organized by a city that accomplish significant emission reductions.
Yeah, we did meet with ICLEI last week and we asked them that question, and they said they don't really have a master document that
that really says something. We have all these plans and yet we don't even go back to see what has been accomplished.
Well, I mean, to be fair, this whole climate action planning enterprise is still relatively new, and cities
We've been doing this for 30 years in Oregon. So it is not that new. So
okay. Shane.
Yes. So as your Miro challenged participants, is there an option for me to get a spreadsheet and I can old school fill out a spreadsheet with priority colors and email it back to you? Yes. Either that or I'll go camp in Mike's office or Tom's office and get 2 proxies.
Belina, you want to respond to that one?
Yes, great question, Shane. We'll be providing instructions for both Miro participation and an Excel version to make it easy. So definitely, yep.
Thank you.
Janet.
So one of the things that we've been talking about is equity, and one of the best practices in terms of staying accountable for actually using an equity lens and not just talking about equity is that you have, equity variables, right? Equity data, so that you can, in a few years, we can kind of check our progress and hold people accountable. We've asked for kind of equity variables. I haven't seen anything yet in terms of what data we have available to use. So I think that that's really important. I think if Alex was here at the meeting today, he would say, don't be like the Salem Kaiser School Board that just kind of says they use an equity lens and then they don't. I think also in terms of like when we do the kind of the final write-up for the climate action plan, I'm trying to imagine how kind of equity would be deeply integrated into that. And so maybe we do the equity things first, right? So equity first is a good kind of best practice. Or maybe we kind of partner together strategies. So we have, like one strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we partner that with kind of an equity strategy so that they're kind of like partnered together in all of our kind of plans for things to do, so that we don't have any strategies that become kind of untethered from equity.
Interesting. Well, thanks for that, Janet. And yes, I think someone, I thought it was maybe you, in our last meeting said that they had some suggested equity variables that they were going to send to us. Was that not you, Janet?
I don't remember, but I can do that.
If you have some suggestions, that would be great. We're looking at all the ways that other cities are wrestling with the same issue, and it has been very hard to quantify equity variables in a way that can be systematized. And so, so far it's been more of a, I guess you might say, qualitative approach rather than quantitative. But we're certainly interested in looking at quantitative as much as we can.
Does Eunice have any suggestions for equity variables, maybe?
Let's see, is Eunice on? Yes, she is.
I can do some research on that.
Okay, thank you.
So from my perspective, what I hear is we have an opportunity to have a leadership role in this area. So that's what I hear, is that we have an opportunity to really be a leader.
Great, thank you, Wendy. Appreciate your perspective coming from the Governor's Equity Council. Other thoughts, comments? Tom Wofford, yep.
Just falling back on John's kind of thoughts, I continue to want to kind of go back to this and see what other communities have successfully implemented. And Kim, are you saying that there is no history of communities successfully implementing?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No,
so
I'm saying
what are sending this group a consolidated list of true, vetted and effective initiatives by other cities would give us a good reference point of what we could start to look at integrating here in Salem. And do we have that list that has been sent out to us and I have just not dug in deep enough? Or
that's what we were discussing earlier. We spoke with ICLEI, who's like a clearinghouse helping local communities on these issues. And we asked them if they had compiled such a list from their work with communities around the country, if they had kind of a list of successful strategies that cities have implemented and the results. And they told us last week they haven't done such a study, or they don't have such a document. So, and we haven't come across something like that in our research over the last several years. There's all kinds of studies of specific issues. You can find reports on transportation initiatives or clean energy initiatives. But we are not aware of sort of a master list that catalogs all the actions that cities have taken.
The Rocky Mountain Institute produced its report. Are they continuing to follow up on that?
Which report are you talking about from RMI?
This was one of the reports that you said, and it was specifically for best practices for cities. And they gave an example of like 10 major actions that cities had done. This is one of the reports you actually provided to us.
Okay, well, there's all kinds of best practice reports, but what I heard—
This was specific actions that were taken in specific cities.
Okay. Well, I'll go back and look at what we had sent you earlier and see if that works. We're happy to resend those materials. There are tons of great ideas that are out there and really valuable reports.
I guess my follow-up to that, Kim, and why I asked that is really not to give more work for your team, but rather use this group as a great group to share kind of some very diverse perspectives of what we think we could accomplish in Salem. And if we start with a benchmark of 10 or so such programs that have worked in like cities, it will probably bring the group really together on those 10 actionable items, knowing that they've been accomplished in other municipalities. And so and maybe that's just how my brain thinks is, hey, let's look at some past historical successes. I just think it would give us great context to start in on some of these key topics, is to understand what was implemented where and why, and how did it work.
Okay, sure. We can definitely send you some resources. Mike.
Yeah, this is going to echo a little bit of what Tom and John just said, that we have a huge list, and I feel like the next hurdle for this project is really getting from that huge list to what is potential for Salem. We can always update these plan 5 years from now and add things, but I think as a first go, we need to figure out of this huge list what is doable, what's effective, what's politically effective, cost effective, and having those examples. And I have some references, but on the top of my head, I can't think of what it was, but of the lists. And I know there's been groups like Corvallis. I think I've been inadvertently on a list group for Corvallis about sustainable Corvallis and all the things they do for 20 plus years. So I'd be happy to, when I find things, send them to you, but maybe everyone on the committee, if they find one or a list, that said, here's what City of Denver did, here's what Sacramento did. Would you be open to having those submissions so that this group can be confident that some of these strategies are being tried out?
Sure. I mean, there's just so much material. It may easily become overwhelming. But
I know, but my concern is you're asking the group, the next thing is to vote on all these things. And the members of the task force, they all have their specialties, but none of us are necessarily greenhouse gas experts. So it's going to be hard to vote on what we think we should do. It'd be a lot of guesswork. Does this make sense for Salem? Well, I'm not going to be too confident about my guesses, but if I had a little more confidence that it's been tried somewhere, that would help. And I see Tom shaking his head. I think maybe he's agreeing with me. So.
Okay, great. Okay, let's wrap up with Ian, and then we'll close. Go ahead, Ian.
I think it's helpful to look at this on a sector by sector approach, and also prioritizing certain sectors. Transportation, as has been mentioned many times, is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And so if we were to take, to use that as an example, we know 2 ways to reduce vehicle or transportation emissions: to electrify the fleet or to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And then you start getting into decision trees. How do you reduce VMTs? And right. So I think it is manageable. I'm afraid that we are overwhelmed by all the possibilities, but if we take them sector by sector and prioritizing the meatier sectors first, I think we can do that. And the other piece I would add is that I think, especially in the initial phases of implementation, it is helpful to prioritize certain things that will take longer. Building out a comprehensive bike lane network will take much longer than setting up urban gardens. And not to say that urban gardens are a bad thing. It's just it takes more time to implement. And when we're working up against a timeline of our own goals, I think we need to be mindful of that as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Thank you for that, Ian. Okay, thank you very much for participating. This has been super helpful. Belina's been taking notes as fast as she possibly can, so we've captured all your thoughts. We will also save this chat, so we have a text record there. It's really helpful for us to hear your thoughts, concerns, suggestions while we're here in the middle of this planning process, and we appreciate you sticking with this. You know, it's referred to sometimes as the groan zone. It can be kind of uncomfortable to be in this middle phase where nothing's quite been decided yet, but it's also a very rich and creative and dynamic place. So thank you for hanging in there in the groan zone with us. And we will see you next at our workshop on February 17th. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.